Chris asked if I was serious about water privatisation being a good thing. Absolutely, Chris, but do send in your text telling me what an utter idiot I am for saying that. I'm joined now by the Sunday Times' deputy political editor, Lara Spirit. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Ed.
So good to have you on. Let's start with this poll for the Times. It's from YouGov and it's attracting a lot of attention. It's got Labour ahead of Reform. It's the first time they've been ahead in 19 months. But it's basically neck and neck. Labour 24, Reform 22, Tories 21, but they are pulling away from the Greens and the Lib Dems. The margin of error basically means they're all in the same place, but it is starting this thought about an early election. What do you think? Is this a Burnham bounce that's going to evaporate, Lara, or is it something more substantial?
Well, when you speak to people in Reform about this, they're very confident and would say, polls in recent weeks have basically oscillated between these two states of play, i.e. there have been some that have put Reform higher, some that have put Labour higher. As you say, the margin of error means that they are basically more or less at the same level at the moment. But that's significant if you're Reform, because you might think that Burnham would have an even more significant bounce, and some of them do genuinely think that because he's seen as perhaps untainted by some of the mistakes that were made under Sir Keir Starmer. But from Labour's perspective, they feel very confident and happy about this, actually. They would say that, as is stated in the piece in the Times this morning, Reform's lowest score since March last year, that actually summer is usually quite a difficult time for incumbent governments, particularly because of small boat crossings, and actually they're trying to buck the trend that so far Andy Burnham has had command of what we call the grid, making very, very regular and frequent announcements that are geared towards the cost of living particularly, but in other areas, and they think that's moving through into the polls. So I think it's still far too early to tell. Very unlikely that any Prime Minister would call an early election on the basis of a poll lead within the margin of error. I think you'd probably agree with me. Not least because you have a great number of Labour MPs who feel that even if you called a general election with a 10-point lead for the Labour Party, they'd still be sure to lose their seats. So I think it's something they would have to feel extremely confident about before they were to actually do it. But nonetheless, I think they'll be feeling pretty cheered by this poll.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because traditionally kind of polling leads are eroded during a general election campaign. But James Johnson from YouGov makes this point in the Times, which I think is very persuasive, which is this is a historic split on the right. Keir Starmer won a massive majority with just over a third of the vote. Andy Burnham is a much better campaigner than Keir Starmer. He could go for it, and even if he loses MPs, he could still get back with a 40 or 90 seat majority. In some ways, having a narrower majority is a better thing. It instills party discipline. There are lots of things that are quite tempting.
I think when you look at some of the things Andy Burnham has said in the past that he is interested in or wants to do, particularly around, wealth taxes, the fiscal rules, particularly some of those around him feel that some of those things could be tweaked or changed in a way that perhaps is not consistent with the manifesto, then obviously having a general election would liberate you from the constraints of that manifesto that at the moment Andy Burnham has pledged himself to be loyal to, basically, and that has constrained what they can do. I think those choices will be in starker focus come the autumn when the budget comes around, because at the moment they're able to make, quite discreet and piecemeal announcements, quite sort of, retail announcements on various different policies. We're seeing it with high streets today, for example. But on those absolutely big changes that really define a government, we are not yet seeing them, and whether or not Andy Burnham feels that he can do that within the confines of this parliament, let's see. But my sense is at the moment that this as a lead is far too fragile to make any sort of confident bounce. That said, I think you're right to point out the right, because actually what's interesting about this isn't that these votes are coming from Reform voters, but actually that Andy Burnham has won over quite a lot of Green and Liberal Democrat voters. That's where this new lead is coming from.
Miles ahead with
and
them.
Nonetheless, Reform are not doing particularly well. So actually, if you're looking at this, we've been talking for a long time about whether or not multi-party politics will truly endure in the UK. It does look at the moment like Andy Burnham is able to take some votes from progressive parties, while that split on the right means that he can capitalise on that even further. But it's all looking pretty fragile. And we talk about droughts. I think we can talk about one of the areas that Andy Burnham might be facing questions on. Yes,
well, let's talk now about early release before we get on to droughts. Has the government found a way to stop the early release of the killers of PC Andrew Harper? This is the signal this morning from the Prime Minister himself, and indeed from the Minister Sally Jameson. She was on with Stig and Salma on Times Radio Breakfast earlier.
He's looking for solutions, and a solution's being identified. I mean, it's tricky because of how sentencing works and the sentence which was handed down to those particular offenders. And so we've got to find a way that makes sure we stop those getting out, whilst also recognising that in relation to other offenders, we do have to apply the sentencing bill because our prisons are overcrowded. And I want to be really clear, going back to the way our prisons were at point of collapse in summer of 2024 is categorically not an option.
We can listen to Times Radio Breakfast every morning from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. It does seem likely, Lara, that he will find a solution. This story's been going on now for about 10 days and everyone has been predicting that he would find a way to keep PC Harper's killers in jail.
Well, I mean, one of the things that we've seen from Andy Burnham so far is that he is quite... he's aware and his team are sensitive to how he is, perceived in the public domain. One of those close to him said to me in recent days that he does have this kind of public conscience test. Like he is very receptive to the fact that when the British public are concerned about something, that's something he has to be very wary of. And this is certainly a case that has caused a huge amount of anger. And I would say, having spoken to a number of people in government, around the Prime Minister in recent days about this case in particular, that there has been something of a disjunct between, on the one hand, officials and people that you speak to who will say, frankly, it's really hard to see how this is actually plausible, because you would have to exempt the entire case entire cases of manslaughter from this. So that's nearly 1,000 prisoners. They don't have any capacity for that. If they didn't go forward with this scheme, they'd be running out of space by November. So essentially, yes, it's a difficult decision, but they cannot see any possible way to do it. And on the other hand, those around the Prime Minister who will say, he listens to the public. And actually, there is clearly, on this case in particular, a sense of real injustice. You've also had not just the family of PC Harper, his widow, his mother speaking out, clearly feeling that this is an egregious breach of justice, but also, the former chief investigator, superintendent, yes, on this case. I spoke to him over the weekend about this, who'd previously not wanted to speak publicly about this, but now feels compelled to do so. Other police forces across the country clearly also very concerned about this issue. And that does, I think, all coalesce into a sense that actually there's great momentum behind this. Absolutely. And that Burnham simply does need to find a way to make sure that they don't leave early. Well,
we're lucky enough to have the former Detective Superintendent Stuart Blake, who was the lead investigator into the killing of PC Andrew Harper, joining us. And to remind you, PC Harper was 28 when he died from catastrophic injuries in 2019. He was dragged behind the getaway car of 3 teenagers who'd fled the scene of a quad bike theft. 2 of his killers, Jesse Cole and Albert Bowers, are eligible for early release at the moment. It would be next year. The driver of the car, Henry Long, is not eligible. Welcome to the show, Stuart Blake.
Thank you. Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us. You are no longer a police officer, but one of the themes that I've wanted to bring out every time I've been discussing this issue is the impact of this decision on the police force. It can't be good for morale if you're a serving police force, or indeed if you have served in the police, to potentially see these killers released early.
No, that's absolutely right. I was appalled when the news first broke to me. I was contacted by Andrew's mum, Debbie, and she explained that she'd had a letter from the Ministry of Justice to say that both Bowers and Cole may be part of that early release proposal and the scheme. It obviously does have an impact on morale, and I think it undermines the judicial process, and more importantly, it's really disrespectful to Andrew and his family.
Yeah, absolutely. You obviously, I don't know if you knew PC Andrew Harper before his death, but you obviously became close to the family. You had to investigate this catastrophic killing.
No, that's right. I didn't have the pleasure of meeting Andrew, but obviously during the course of the 11-month investigation, I got to know Andrew very well through everything that we were doing, everything that I was reading, and also because I met obviously his widow Lissy on many occasions, and likewise with his mother and father.
And Lara Spirit was saying earlier that you've been reluctant to speak out previously. Why have you decided to go public now?
Because simply it's the right thing to do. I've got strong views around this, and obviously the campaign was gathering momentum. Those that were close to Andrew have spoken publicly, and I felt it was the right thing to give my perspective. And when I say I'm talking about my colleagues that worked tirelessly on the case, because the voice of me is actually the voice of us, and I think it's important that that should be heard, because it's very consistent and very much in keeping with everything that you've heard and listened to already.
And have many of your former colleagues contacted you to express their concerns?
Well, I was actually probably proactive with it. I let my former colleagues know that I was doing some interviews, and I wanted to make sure that I tried to reflect as best I could their strength of feeling on this particular matter, and certainly over the last few days, that's what I've tried to do, which has been pretty easy, to be honest, because everyone was saying the same thing. We're all appalled by it, and trying to do everything we can to make sure that those that make these decisions are listening to what we're saying and the impact it has.
There are some pretty appalling pictures of Bowers and Cole when they're being led into the prison van. They're sort of laughing and joking. Did you get any sense they felt any remorse about this?
No, not at all. And right from the very outset, there was, from their time in police custody through the initial remand hearings and then to the subsequent trial, there was no sense of any remorse at any point throughout that whole process, which was even more sickening. Bear in mind, not long after their arrest, it became very apparent to them what it was that they were suspected of and eventually convicted of. So no, I think that kind of says it all for me.
I mean, the judge said, although the men involved were convicted of manslaughter, it was very close to a case of murder in its seriousness. Why did he say that?
Because when you look at all the aggravating factors and the circumstances surrounding Andrew's death, it was a really serious case of manslaughter. And as you rightly say, Mr. Justice Edis, at the time, who was a very senior High Court judge, his words were that some cases of manslaughter are so serious they're very close to that of murder, and that is the case here. And that's because of all the circumstances that surrounded that case. It was an extremely serious case of manslaughter, and one that was very close to that of murder.
Yeah, in the sense that they could have stopped, driving much earlier and that kind of thing.
Well, that's right. When you look at the circumstances, when Andrew Harper and his colleague, when they confronted Long Bowers and Cole in the process of stealing the quad bike, they had a decision to make, and one of those decisions was that they could have stopped, and they'd been caught. That wasn't the decision that they made. They made the decision that they were not going to be arrested at all costs, and all costs meant that Andrew tragically lost his life in the most horrific circumstances.
Andy Burnham has said that he feels confident, he's increasingly confident, that a solution can be found. I mean, when a story like this runs for so long, to be blunt, a lot of us become sort of armchair experts about how to free up prison places. But are you confident that a solution can be found, either to potentially exempt anyone who's been involved in the death of an emergency service worker, or to exempt people who are in prison for manslaughter from early release?
I was always confident that a solution would be found. It never sat comfortably with me that manslaughter, bear in mind we're talking about the unlawful killing of somebody, should ever be part of the proposed early release scheme. I understand and I appreciate the pressures that the prison service are under in terms of the numbers and obviously what's going through the courts today and in the weeks and months ahead. I understand that, and I understand the pressures and the decisions that the government have to make. This just isn't one that sits comfortably with me, and I think that's been echoed across the whole of the country. I think the distinction here is that when you look at a case of this seriousness, the judge made it very clear in his sentencing remarks that they should serve 2/3 of the sentence that was passed, and any deviation from that is just not right. And I think there's a wider issue as around whilst we're focusing on the case of Andrew, and understandably, there are other cases undoubtedly of manslaughter that are very serious, and people that are serving sentences, and this is equally as important to that family and those families as it is to Andrew and his family. So I was always confident that there were options available to ministers and the government. One of the things that always struck me was that if they were looking to try and find solutions, then those that were sentenced to more than 10 years of imprisonment, that would be the sensible place to perhaps start. But as I say, my personal view is that any case of manslaughter, bear in mind it's the unlawful killing of another human being, shouldn't be part of that early release scheme.
Well, thank you, Stuart Blake. It can't have been easy for you to come on and talk about this issue. You were the lead officer investigating the killing of PC Andrew Harper, and you're now speaking publicly about your opposition to releasing two of his killers early. Lara will be staying with us, and we'll be coming back to talk about the government's treatment of the drought, whether it should be a national emergency, and was my recent conversation with King Charles real or an AI fraud? This is Ed Vaizey on Times Radio. Welcome back. It's Ed Vaizey on Times Radio. Still with the Sunday Times' deputy political editor Lara Spirit. More than 2/3 of England is now in drought. That's roughly 71% of the country. This week we'll experience our 5th heat wave of the summer after what has already been one of the driest couple of months since records began. Obviously the biggest question facing the nation today is whether Stig should be allowed to have a bath and a shower. But a second order question, Lara Spirit, is should Andy Burnham call a Cobra meeting or indeed declare a national emergency? Is this journalist wanting something performative, or is there a serious point here?
Well, I mean, I think there is a serious point insofar as, we've heard from Emma Hardy, who is, of course, the Minister responsible for water, who's outlined some of the things that the government wants to do and is planning to do. So increasing the national water supply by building some new reservoirs, reducing leaks, making it easier for farmers to build some irrigation reservoirs on their land. But also, I mean, at the heart of this is that I don't think we expect the next reservoir to be ready by something like 2036. I mean, this is not a short-term solution. So clearly there'll be pressure on Andy Burnham to say something and to do something in circumstances where we've heard from him on early release today, but there is a lot of pressure for him to go further on drought, considering just how many new areas were added to that drought list yesterday rather.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is interesting that one sort of almost heard by accident there was a hosepipe ban, but we're not really getting a lot of public service messages about saving water. I mean, people just sort of carrying on as normal. Well,
I was watching television last night and an advert came on, but essentially, I don't know if you've seen it, I think it's the Water UK advert perhaps, but the only main message was take a shorter shower, which doesn't quite seem up to the scale of the challenge that British people face, considering what you read out at the beginning, which is just how much more water we're all using now. So I think you're right to say perhaps there is a bigger question here, but also there is a question about the extent to which the government wants to talk about action that it's expecting and hoping water companies will take. At the same time, they're also talking about greater public ownership, nationalising water companies. This is something Andy Burnham spoke about a huge amount during the Makerfield by-election campaign and in the weeks subsequent to that. So it's quite difficult when this Labour government has recognised that the level of trust in these water companies is on the floor, while also obviously having to lean on them in quite a significant way at times like this when trying to get its messaging across and asking us to have faith that they'll do enough. So I think it's difficult to see how the government will make this any easier this week, but certainly we're definitely going to be hearing more from them, you'd imagine, on these questions.
Brilliant. And because I'm in the House of Lords, we've decided to discuss this not very important story. The Lord Speaker, Michael Forsyth, has written to peers about a rise in fraudsters. It's such a House of Lords story, this, impersonating foreign dignitaries or members of the royal household. I mean, it's perfectly normal for me to take regular calls from King Charles, but I'll just have to be very careful and say, is it really you, sir, when you call? But it is an increasing problem, and I've shared an office with a hereditary peer who was scammed in front of me, as it were, as he busily sent off a 50 quid Apple voucher to his godson, who was resident in another country somewhere. It is a big it's interesting that Michael Forsyth has sent this out, but it is a growing problem, I guess. Yeah,
I mean, do you feel that you're resilient to those kinds of phishing attempts?
No, not at all. Absolutely not. No, I did the Twitter scam, where you get a DM from someone saying, I'm up for an award.
Have you nominated lots of people for these awards?
I clicked on it and then suddenly realised that I'd just spent a week looking at somebody complaining that their Twitter account had been taken over.
I haven't had any messages from you
scam.
saying, can you vote for me, which suggests that maybe you weren't a victim of that.
I think I survived that, but then I then was forced to sort of pay up for all the kind of, protect your Twitter account, the grey tick and all that sort of stuff.
You've done that? Don't you just use two-factor authentication?
That too. I belt and braces approach from me. That's the trouble. But there you go. There's not much to say about this except, Michael Forsyth has written to
Peers
the
out there, be
House
safe.
of Lords
Yeah.
to avoid being scammed, and our average age is 70, so we're rich pickings, I suspect.
You're so young for a peer.
Scammers. I am. It's the reason.
Are you friends with the other young peers
Yes, we all hang around and be young
in
together.
a sort of young caucus?
Yeah, and talk about our creaking knees because we're all still in our mid-50s. But there you go. There you go. Well, thank you so much, Lara Spirit, Sunday Times' Deputy Political Editor, for coming on the show. It was very good to have you on.